Well, I have an SAT coming up, so I did SAT and I prepared this presentation. Yes. Okay, it seems about time. We can probably get started. Okay, so collapsing. So collapsing is basically a way to prioritize the strongest argument. In my experience, there's typically three ways you define strongest argument. One is the one that you feel you can persuade your judge the best. So whether or not that's something you feel strongly about, then you can prioritize that. You can prioritize that argument. The second one is the argument that has the least responses to it, and this is usually the one that I go for because it's just the easiest to argue. In high levels of debate, you will typically see judges prioritize or prioritize like arguments that are least covered over arguments that make sense more. And this is something that I usually do. And the last one is the one that has the biggest impact. And of course, this is just easier to extend and easier to collapse to because you can easily weigh it. But obviously, there are like plenty of ways you can weigh any kind of argument. So those are the three types of strongest arguments that I would like categorize them as. And collapsing is basically just collapsing to that one argument or extending that one argument and only going for that one argument. And it's really weird when I first learned about it to think about because it's like you're kind of giving up your other arguments, but it really does help in terms of simplifying the round for the judge. So personally, me and Aiden have judged a lot, and we always just find it really nice when other people just collapse because many of the times, and Aiden can probably attest to this, that you get what you'd call judge screwed, and it's typically when the round is really complicated. Judges have 5 different type of arguments to evaluate. The debaters didn't really do that good of a job explaining or weighing, so they basically have the round in their hands. And you never want this type of round because it means that anything can really happen. The judge can just literally decide anything. So by collapsing, you're simplifying the round for the judge. You make it so that the judge can only look to your one argument and is not really like confused by it. And probably the most important point of collapsing is creating more time, especially in LD debate. The affirmative has 3 minutes as its last speech to address something to address the negative speech of 6 minutes, and that's obviously extremely difficult. So what collapsing does is it basically just gets rid of the other arguments that you don't really want and prioritizes the one argument that you really feel that is the strongest in the round. This means that you can basically put all your eggs in one basket, but in this terms, it's like a good connotation, and basically means that you can go all in for this one argument and make it so that you can elaborate much more than if you went for all the arguments. And lastly, it allows you to ignore your opponent's arguments based on your other contentions. I'll go into this a bit further, but like generically just means that your other arguments that you're not going for, you basically just like drop them. Like it doesn't really matter in this debate. Okay, and now how to collapse. So first thing is to extend your argument. So I would like to use an example. So for example, things like school protection. So let's take the topic of gun control. Let's say I'm advocating for school protection. I have 3 reasons. One is that it's cheap. One is that it's safety, which is obviously the most important. And third is that it enhances security of the school itself. So if I were to go for the safety argument, I would extend basically saying that safety, that school protections allow more safety, makes it so that school shooters can't get in. It saves lives. Lives outweighs anything else because ultimately we should prioritize lives over money or lives over like other things because it's number one, right? So that's like a basic extension of the argument. Typically it has to be short, but if you have a lot of time, you can just like build a story around it. The second one, second thing you have to do is you have to address the offense on your other contentions. So here I'll explain what offense and defense is. So offense is basically reasons why you should win. The 3 reasons that I gave before about how it's cheap, safe, and it enhances security are all offensive reasons why the judge should vote for you. Defense is reasons why the judge shouldn't vote for your opponent. So things like this include what I was talking about in previous lectures about link defense, where you basically just say, hey, like this isn't true at all. So an example of this, let's take the cheap, how school protection is very cheap. So defense on this cheap example would be it is not cheap. Offense on this cheap example would be it is expensive. Ultimately, what this does is that by saying it is expensive, the judge, it gives a reason for the judge not to vote on school protections. Rather, if you say it's not cheap, then it's just a reason why this argument about being cheap really doesn't matter. So ultimately, what you guys should be doing is you should be creating offensive reasons on your opponent's arguments, because that makes it so that they cannot drop it, because it's ultimately a reason why you should win. So examples of this include link turns, impact turns, and things of that nature. So instead of saying something is cheap, you say it's expensive, basically saying the opposite happens. So it is important that you address the offense on your other contentions, because if it's defense, it ultimately does not matter in this debate, right? So if it's defense, you just say that, sure, we'll concede defense on this cheap contention. It's not cheap, but that's not a reason why you should vote for my opponent on this argument, right? Rather, if they say something that is expensive, school protections being expensive, it's an independent reason why we should not do school protections. So you have to address it. So overall, the second thing you have to do when you're collapsing is you have to address the offense on your other contentions. Only by addressing the offense on other contentions can you drop it. So if anything's a defense argument, you can basically just like concede it. It really does not matter in this debate. The only thing that matters is basically the argument that you're going for. And the final thing you have to do, and I'd argue the most important thing, is weigh it against your contentions. So obviously, weigh it against your contentions and your opponent's contentions. Obviously, your arguments will not be perfect. There always is room for your opponent to argue. So the thing you do to cover all your outs is basically weigh safety over your other contentions. So like it's cheap. So even if they do win that it's expensive, you can say, hey, safety comes first, lives comes first. We should prioritize lives over money any day of the week, and also security, like lives outweigh that as well. But also you should outweigh safety against your opponent's contentions, incorporate framework, and all that things that we've already taught you about how to weigh. And basically through this, you can basically make it so that even if you do lose your argument, you lose your other arguments, your extensions and your weighing can come in handy and basically cover all your outs that you like maybe missed. And last is when to collapse. So you should try. So Aiden says that you should never collapse with the parent judge, but I'd argue that sometimes it is pretty viable, especially when you're having a lot of time and especially when you're developing a story. Ultimately, debate is a persuasion type of activity. If you can persuade your parent judge very well, then you can collapse. Things like life is number one. There's been so many shootings. This is a try or die issue. We have to prioritize safety over anything else, which means that even if they do win this cheap argument, you should ultimately like prioritize safety, right? So things like that, collapsing do work. The problem is with a lot of parent judges, they look at all like the debate generally, and they're like, hey, this guy didn't really address this argument. That's a reason for them to vote them down, which is very scary. But I think generally, like covering every argument a bit, but then collapsing to ultimate argument is probably the best strategy that you have. The second thing is a collapse usually occurs in the second half of the round. This is like probably most logical. If you collapse too early, the opponent knows what argument you're going for, so they're just going to pile on arguments on top of it. So if the cheap argument has 5 points, if the enhanced security argument has 4 points, and you have 1 point, usually in the second half of the round, you collapse to the one that has the 1 point, because it's obviously the easiest to extend and it's probably the most persuasive. You shouldn't reveal your cards too early, so you should save it for either the 2NR and in LD, you should do the 2NR or the 2AR. And finally, this is what I've mentioned before, but collapse only after you address all link and impact turns, things like how it's being more expensive, or things like, I mean, impact turns don't really make sense in this topic, but yeah, only collapse after you address all the link turns and impact turns, and basically what we call offense. So next is judge adaptation, what Aiden will talk about.
Okay, so there are typically 3 kinds of judges that we see in basically every form of debate. These are flow judges, which we usually refer to as experienced judges, lay judges, which are like your typical parent judges who have virtually no knowledge of debate as an event. And lastly, you have flay judges, which is usually a nice even combination of both. But for flay judges, it's like anywhere between being a parent judge and being like an actual debater. So there's a really, really wide range of what kind of flay they are. Sometimes they lean more towards flay, sometimes they lean more towards flow, and sometimes they're really, really good even middle. All right, so For the first kind of judge is the flow kinds of judges. So these are typically going to be your experienced debaters or your debate coaches. They're going to prefer tech over truth. And what that just means is that they're going to prefer what happens in a round, or like whatever you say in a round, over what actually is true. So for example, if one side comes up and says, okay, the sky is green, and they have a piece of evidence for that, and the other side does not refute that, then under the judge's interpretation, the sky is now green for the remainder of the round. And so he he should make his decision based on the fact that the sky is green. It just means that like they don't come in with preconceived notions. They come in only looking at what usually takes place in the debate scope. And so they have a lot less preconceived notions and a lot less biases than your average parent judge or your average flay judge does. They're also going to have very clear paradigms. Paradigms are just basically an outline of what exactly they want to see in a debate, what they don't want to see in a debate, what they're okay with, what they're not okay with, and what they prefer to see in a debate. And so like usually you can see this on like a website called Tab Room, which if you actually do get into debate, you'll be using a lot throughout your debate career. But overall, it's just like a really, really like easy way to determine what kinds of things they want to see. And so flow judges typically make it really easy for you to adapt to them. They also understand a lot of complex debate techniques. So overall, what we've taught you guys basically so far is pretty simple and pretty basic in terms of what you're learning for debate. But there are things like theory, there are things like critiques and tricks and stuff like that, that it requires a lot of like comprehensive understanding of debate, understanding of literature and stuff like that. And so basically they'll be able to understand all these kinds of arguments, as opposed to like lay judges and flay judges who actually won't be able to understand these kinds of things, right? Even if you actually do win a theory round, there's no real guarantee that a lay judge will be able to understand it, and you could still like just lose the round off of that. And so you typically only want to use these kinds of complex debate techniques in front of flow judges. And lastly, they're usually okay with speed. So at higher levels of debate, you'll see people start speaking faster and faster, reaching like 300, 400, even 500 words per minute. And so these kinds of flow judges are typically okay handling these kinds of speeds. But a lot of the flay judges and a lot of lay judges aren't okay with that.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add that inside the flow judges category, there's of course different people who will prefer different things. So things like, for example, we talked to you about like theory arguments before, other arguments like critiques. There are separate judges that are more comfortable with these different types of things. So even if they are flow judges, does not mean that they accept every single experience thing. And additionally, there's also this like subcategory of flow judges that are like pretending to be flow judges. So this is really frustrating actually when you go into a round. So you have to make sure that these people are actually flow judges. A lot of people will say that they're flow judges and say that they're experienced, just so they don't like appear, I guess, like inferior or something. And so you go like full speed and they turn out they're not actually flow judges. So you guys have to watch out for that when you're actually debating, to make sure that they're not actually just like pretending to be flow judges. It is frustrating and it does happen. So.
All right, next up is flay judges. So for flay judges, they have a really, really wide range of skill level. Like I've already explained before, they're basically like anywhere in between your parent judge or like an experienced debater. And so what kind of knowledge they have is like really, really tricky to determine, because they might be more leaning towards a flow judge or they might be leaning more towards a lay judge. So you typically need to take some time to like try to understand what kind of flay judge they are. And the best way to do this is just to ask them questions beforehand, or ask them questions ahead of like right before the round begins. Most judges are open to these kinds of things. Like if you ask them something like, hey, are you okay with speed? They'll answer you really, really clearly. And so it's just a really, really good way of determining what kind of skill level your judge is at. And it works especially well for flay judges when you can't really determine what kind of flay judge they are. Like I said before, they're a really good mix between flow and lay judge, and they typically will understand debate, but usually only on like a very basic level. So everything that we've taught you so far, all the techniques like collapsing, for example, weighing, these kinds of things, they'll probably be okay with. But as you go higher and higher, like the level of techniques like theory or critiques and stuff like that, they might not be as like receptible to. And so you need to like make sure that you're not going too overboard with the amount of debate terminology or the kind of debate techniques that you're using. And sometimes they're okay with speed. In my experience, we tend to treat flay judges like lay judges, because if you debate like you would in front of a lay judge, every single kind of debater, like every single kind of judge can understand it. A flow judge can understand like when you're debating like a lay judge as well. And so it's typically just a safer bet to debate like you would in front of a lay judge, in front of lay judges. As opposed to debating as you would in front of a flow judge, which a lot of people can't understand. But yeah, most of the time they are okay with debate at the very least on a basic level. And lastly, they sometimes are okay with speed. Again, this one really, really varies depending on what kind of judge you have. And the easiest way to determine this is to just ask if they're okay with speed. But flay judges are like just a wide variety. So you need to be really, really careful on like not going straight out of the gate full speed or speaking too slowly, because both of those things can either cost you the round or like time or something else like that.
Yeah, I find this like point about asking questions to judges especially important. But keeping in mind, they can also just like lie. A lot of people will say, I'm okay with speed, but they don't really know what speed is or how fast you will go. I had experience with one of my friends where the judge at the end of the round said to the debater, yeah, I didn't understand a single thing you said, so I'm voting you down. So it's really important that you prepare for the worst and you basically make sure that you're going extra slow and be skeptical of what people say, because oftentimes it's not true.
Yeah, really quickly, just to address the comment in the chat, speed is basically just like how fast or how slow someone talks. Okay, so speed is kind of weird because it actually varies across different debate events. For Harvey's event, LD, you'll see people going like really, really fast in a technique known as spreading, and they'll reach like 400, 500 words per minute, just like speaking as fast as you can, to the point where for most people, I guess for most people who aren't experienced debaters, it doesn't even sound like actual English anymore. But in my kind of debate, PF, we tend to talk a little slower. Like the max you ever see is like 300 words per minute, or the average is about 200 to 250 words per minute. And that just like basically speed is just determining like how fast a debater can talk, like in order to get through as much content as possible. Like you'll see in LD, because they have longer speech times and also have more content they want to get through, they'll talk really, really fast to try to like cover as much like content as possible. Whereas in PF, we have shorter speeches and we have like a more basic kind of debate structure. And so we tend to talk a little slower because PF is typically more receptible to like lay judges and like these kinds of like parent judges. Okay, and that's a perfect segue into what lay judges are. So lay judges are typically going to be your parent judges or like relatives that don't actually know anything about debate, or people who are overall just completely inexperienced in the debate world. Usually they want debaters to go slow because they're going to be like typically like parent judges or something like that, and they won't be able to understand these 400, 500 words per minute stuff. So you're just going to be seeing them like asking debaters to go really, really slow. And if you choose not to go slow, then most of the time they'll down like Harvey's seen in his experience, right? Like they just won't understand you if you speak fast. So speaking fast will be like seriously detrimental to your chances at winning the round. Okay, next for lay judges, posture, attire, confidence, all these kinds of things are actually taken into account, right? Like lay judges will actually down you if you aren't wearing a suit, but your opponents are, or like if you, like even if you're completely dominating them, if you have a really, really quiet or shy voice and your opponent is loud and confident and seems like they're winning the round, then the lay judge can just make that decision off that, right? Because most of the time, lay judges won't actually understand everything that's going on in the round. They're going to be taking a look at other things that influence the round as well for them, such as your posture, your attire, like what kind of clothes you're wearing, how professional you're being, how kind you're being. And so these kinds of factors like actually become a secondary way of them making a decision, like as opposed to just looking at strictly what's in the round. And lastly, they typically don't understand a lot of debate terminology or techniques. So even if you went up to them and said like, hey, like, next up, I'm going to be weighing in my next speech or something like that, they might not understand what weighing is. So typically we just kind of rephrase these things. Like just say, okay, I'm going to be comparing the two worlds, or I'm going to be looking at like what the result of my case is and what the result of their case is and contrasting them or something like that, right? You want to be able to break it down and explain it in simple terms rather than using debate terminology that they may or may not understand. And it's like you, most of the time, just go slow, talk really, really normally, and try to paint like a bigger narrative as opposed to just like strictly winning the round. If you create a good storyline for a lot of lay judges, it'll be a lot easier for them to follow and they'll be a lot more compelled to believe your case.
Yeah, and I find a strategy really good for lay judges is just telling a story. A lot of these debates have like a general story, whether that's like lives lost, structural violence is especially like persuasive, things of that nature. It is also important to know for lay judges that, and for basically all judges, that you need to be able to have versatility in your casing, and like in your cases. So for example, lay judges will definitely not buy extinction level impacts like nuclear war. So be extremely, unless you have like 15 different links into it that are extremely persuasive, which in my experience have never worked. But so things like structural violence, things like that are impacting people in real life. I remember there was like a voting topic, and that we talked about, or my team talked about, like COVID and disease, and we often use this against leaders because they can relate to it. They can relate to the story. So be sure that you can like rephrase what your case says, or at least change a lot of the topics in it to be more like accustomed to lay judges and paired judges. Because even if you do explain it very well, there's a chance that they won't get it. So being relatable, telling a story, being probably the most persuasive that you can be is definitely really good for these judges. Okay, so next, and this is our final thing before our drill, is flowing. So flowing is really important. It's basically a way to keep track of you and your opponent's arguments. You write down key ideas made in the round, whether that which includes like things like framework, their taglines, author, date, important statistics in their evidence. And usually it's the way for especially lay debaters to get information. Once you approach high levels of debate, people disclose their case, which I think I covered it before, but it's basically you just send your case over, or you send main topics. There's a wiki, so a lot of people will just say, yeah, check my wiki, it's the case that I used. And you have direct access to all their cards and all their evidence. But the thing that especially comes in useful once you reach high level debate is the debates become progressively faster. So things like analytic arguments, which are like arguments that people don't usually write down and are not carded. So they just like list out, especially like in super high level debates, where they 8 point. They literally have 8 points against one argument because they're prepping right before the round. So like because they're prepping right before the round, and even before the tournament even starts, they look at your wiki and they're like, hey, let's just prep out this argument out. So they usually have 10 points and they have practiced this. So it's extremely important that you know how to flow very well because you have to keep track of your opponent's arguments. And especially, again, once you reach high levels around, a lot of these arguments are like make or break. Some arguments include like independent voters, where if you don't address this, you literally lose the round. Other things include pretty high level things like spikes, where if you don't address it, then it's an independent reason for you to use things like tricks, which you'll all, like, if you want to get into debate, you'll learn about. But things like that, it's incredibly important that you are able to write down your opponent's analytics and really understand. And ultimately, that comes with practice, flowing, and practice, like listening to a lot of people talk. But with it just comes with experience. Okay, so why do we flow? So in PF, flowing is the only way to keep track of someone's case. They don't really have as much disclosure norms as we do in LD. A main contributor to that factor is the existence of theory debates in LD, which is becoming increasingly popular in PF, where we can contest the rules of debate and be like, hey, this isn't really fair. So things like disclosing, we can say, hey, you didn't disclose, that's really unfair, you should lose on it, which are all pretty advanced things, but you'll get more into it. So especially in PF, flowing is the only way to keep track of someone else's case. It lets you write down, and specifically the form, it lets you write down your opponent's responses, so you can respond to them. It also allows you to clearly see the state of the round. So whether that is how many arguments he has on this one argument, like, let's not go for that anymore. Let's go for another argument. It also includes things like different offs. So offs are basically independent independent reasons for you to vote for your opponent. So whether that is a disad is one off, another disad would be another off, and like a counterplan, which is something more advanced, would be another off. So with 3 different sheets of paper, as you'd call it, like, you can independently see the state of each debate, and it's pretty organized, or it should be pretty organized, so you can see like how you're doing on each side of the flow. And lastly, I think this is the most important, especially if you like flow online, is you can save your flows. So you learn from your mistakes, you can send it to your teammates if they need any type of arguments, and you can also reference arguments in your future rounds. So a lot of this comes from drills. So if you do a drill, for example, and you learn how to respond to like an advanced type of argument, you can reference this and pull it up in your future speeches and just use the arguments that you've already like created. Additionally, you can just use rounds from other people or your previous rounds, so you can learn from your mistakes, and you can look at it. So when you're doing rebuttal redos, which are just like you redo your 1AR or 2AR, you can basically look at the flow and see what you didn't do, what you did do, and basically learn from it, which is probably the best way to improve in debate, is by redoing things. Okay, lastly, and probably the most important part, how do you flow? Okay, so so primarily this is used to write down. You write down the tags, like I mentioned earlier. You write down the tags of all the cards that they have. You write down the author, and you write down the date. This is probably the most important information you can get from it. If you hear any like important words that they say, then you can write it down. So pre-flow is basically before the round and before like the tournament even, you write down your entire case. You basically pre-flow it. You write down things I said earlier, taglines, your taglines, authors, and the date. You also write down important things like framework, and different types of like solvency evidence, for example. And the most important part of flowing, you have to because you have to write down what someone says at 200 words per minute, you have to abbreviate. You're obviously not going to write down everything. So abbreviate really important terms. For example, value, you just put V, criterion, you put C. As you become more accustomed to a lot of these terms, like morality, you just write M because you know what that means. Ultimately, every flow is accustomed to each person. So other people may not understand what you're writing down. You may not understand what other people are writing down, but it's important that you have your own abbreviations. Things like gun control can be shortened to GC, like economy, econ, all that kind of stuff. The third point is that you can flow online or paper. I recommend only doing on paper, especially when you're a new debater, because flowing online can be really, really complicated. Some parts of it will be like you forget. For example, I just completed one time on a debate, I completely forgot that there was a separate doc that I had for like this one specific argument that my opponent made. So flowing it on paper is definitely more organized, and you can just reference it way better, and it's just better for you in general. But if you do want to flow online, there are several programs you can use. Excel, for example, you can set up a template, which is what my team uses. You can use Flexcel, which is an independent program used for debating, but I don't really recommend that too much because you can't really save it that well. And so just like specifically how to flow. So usually you flow in 5 columns, depending on if you're negative or affirmative. You have one page for the affirmative and one page for the negative. On one page, you should have your case already pre-flown down, and then their next speech. So their 1ER, their rebuttal to your case, you write that right next to it. So you have columns, and you typically just write top down, and you save space when you need. Make sure you're not like extending it all the way. If you think about, for example, Chinese like writing and like Japanese writing, like they write top down, and that's typically what you're trying to do. You're trying to just create your arguments in rows, and then just across from each argument, you can just draw a line across and just say, this is my argument here, and basically save space. And lastly, specific tips on how you flow is like, for example, you can circle, make symbols, underline, star things. And this is especially useful for paper. This is why I recommend paper, because you can make specific symbols. You can draw lines, you can like highlight something to make it so that you make sure you address it, so you don't like miss out on a lot of arguments that people usually make. Okay, Aiden, I think we can, there's a lot of information, so we can give them like a 5-minute break, and then we can resume with our drill later. We are okay. Actually, it's time. So before we get into it, we're going to be doing a drill. Well, basically, okay. We'll explain the drill a bit later. But before we get into it, I will show you one of my flows. It's not great, but it is sufficient to show you guys what it should generally look like. And I do flow on laptop, especially since this was online. But okay, so this is an example of a flow. As you can see, let me try scrolling. Yeah, okay, as you can see, a lot of the stuff on the bottom. This is the AC, so affirmative case. The method underview is basically like the underview. I think I talked to you about this. It's basically independent cards on that's preempting the affirmative or negative case, and there's offs. So offs, like I mentioned before, are independent case positions that that are reasons why you should vote for them. And at the end here, it's 1 ER off. So usually in these different types of arguments, you have the 1 and C. So this is what they've read. So I only, since they didn't disclose, I had to write down the like cards. I did like know what they were talking about. So I just wrote the card dates because that's only what was relevant. And second, I also wrote my argument. So a lot of the times what I do, since I don't like, since I already like know their arguments, is I just write down their like my arguments. As I'm listening to them, I'm creating my arguments against it. So they have an interp, I have a counter interp. That's the pretty advanced stuff. And then they have a few points and I just like write it down here. I was the affirmative in this circumstance. And then through this, I was able to save time. I was able to like 6 point, which is pretty good for me even. I don't really know how I did that. But and all these different reasons are why and arguments I can cover. And the next is the 2NR. So notice how you have different tabs or you have different like columns for each speech. This is really important because you can have organized. If they write something here, you can just write something like next to it, right? So on a lot of these arguments, like I didn't write down what the other person said because I just knew it. Additionally, it's really important that even if you don't know what they say, you can still say your own arguments. So like perm is just a generally known type of thing and you should have it in every single round. But like it's pretty advanced stuff and you'll learn about it. And other arguments like we solve arms race, like a lot of this other stuff, is pretty contextual to what they say. And it's really easy to just like argue against it. And one thing I especially find important about flowing is that you can basically just copy paste existing arguments that you already have on other docs onto the flow, and it makes it super easy because you have a concise space. It also makes it really easy because you can just flip between tabs. This one, I didn't really pre-flow. And then the NC, I don't really know what happened to it, I'll be honest. But you should look at the first off. The first off is really good in saying like how you should specifically do it. The problem with mine, I think, is I just need more spacing. The thing that comes the problem with online debate is that you are often like are scrolling a bunch to see what arguments you have. It becomes really disorganized. Rather, if you have like a piece of paper in front of you, it's pretty easy to see. So this is just an example of a flow that should happen. But we can go back to our activity. Okay, Aiden, you want to start with the activity? I know there's a slide for it, but I think it's pretty easy to explain.
Yeah, okay, so the activity is pretty easy. Basically, I'm just going to be reading all 52 cards from the deck, like playing cards, right? And I want each of you guys to write them down as you guys hear it. You can do it on a sheet of paper. You guys can do it on your laptop if you want, but I prefer doing it on a sheet of paper specifically for this one because I think it's a lot easier to like just draw out symbols instead. If that gives you a small like tip on how to do this. But yeah, I'm basically just going to be reading them out and you guys are going to be writing them down. And then afterwards, we'll just call in random people to give us your list and we'll see how many of them you got correctly, or we'll just call in you guys and see how many of them you got in general.
Yeah, actually before that, I would like to share an example of spreading. I think it's severely underestimated how fast people can actually go. And I know a lot of, like, for example, my parents are like, how do you even understand it? It obviously comes with practice, but, oh wait, actually, I probably need to share with sound. Yeah, okay. Okay, great. So this is an example for finals 2016, finals Clements FT versus Harvard Westlake NS. And this is just an example. He isn't even going like as fast as I've heard, but it's pretty fast.
Threats. This display is meant to consider the threats of serious danger is more exciting to me than stories about how poor people are discriminated against. Security's misdirection on epic scale of functions to distract you from the structures inside their real threats, convince you permanently afraid that you will keep the military industrial complex cooking. Now, underview-based structures that constantly criticize the status quo will present real alternatives, feed existing power structures. People frustrated will go to reigning ideologies. Brian 12, the left calls failed to abstraction is good at carrying critiques yet poor at proposing realistic alternatives, thinking about their academic tenure, then producing change rule. This revolutionary is great friend for reactionary because they drive.
Okay, I think that's enough to see. So as you can see from this example, he goes pretty fast. You can hear specific words, which he is doing really well, where he is like basically pausing and saying specific keywords that just like your ears perk up when you hear it. Things like powerhouse are definitely examples of what he's the topic and the resolution that he's talking about. And specific examples, you hear him say underview, which just clearly distinguishes like where he is. A lot of things that he does well is, for example, a thing called a signposting, where you tell specifically the judge where you're at and you slow down. So a lot of debaters, they go really, really fast, but they slow down on taglines and card names because they know that that the judge is looking for them. A lot of judges will also like there's immensely fast. I don't honestly, I'm pretty sure that they're just slurring their words, but a lot of judges will just allow it. And it basically makes it so it's impossible to actually hear. The judges will most definitely like have them slow down on analytic cards. The reason why a lot of judges can afford for people to go super fast is because the doc is already disclosed. But in other scenarios, you have to be able to flow, especially in lay rounds where disclosure norm is not really like a thing. So make sure you guys know how to flow, and this activity will definitely help you. And it's something that me and Aiden both did during debate camp.
Oh yeah, just one more thing before I start this one. So Harvey did mention that a lot of like people who spread, like judges are okay with that because of the fact that they have the disclosed doc in front of them, and so they can just read along. Typically people can read faster than like they can like like speak. But for PF, disclosure isn't really a norm yet, and so a lot of people don't actually go with spreading yet. There are some people who try spreading, but it's not really at the same level as it is in LD, which is why a lot of PFers can't understand or can't actually spread. Like I myself can't spread. I can understand it to some extent, but not really like as well as Harvey does, right? And so like it really just depends on what kind of event you're trying to do. If you're trying to do things like LD, then spreading becomes a skill you basically need to have. And well, I mean, it varies depending on what kind of debate you want to do, right? But and then things like PF, you don't really need to know how to spread, but yeah. Okay. Yeah, so everyone just grab out a sheet of paper, and then I guess, yeah, we'll get the activity started. Do you guys need a second to get it out? I can give everyone like a minute really quickly, and then. Okay, is everyone ready? Okay, yeah, I won't go too fast because I know you guys aren't really experienced with this kind of stuff. So yeah, I'll just speak in as a relatively normal speed. Okay. Three of hearts, nine of spades, queen of hearts, three of diamonds, king of diamonds, five of hearts, four of hearts, ace of clubs, queen of clubs, two of clubs, king of spades, eight of clubs, jack of clubs, king of clubs, six of hearts, nine of hearts, jack of spades, ace of spades, 10 of diamonds, three of clubs, six of spades, five of diamonds, queen of spades, ace of hearts, two of diamonds, ace of diamonds, seven of clubs, two of hearts, 10 of spades, four of diamonds, 10 of hearts, eight of spades, 10 of clubs, jack of hearts, three of spades, seven of hearts, four of clubs, two of spades, eight of hearts, nine of diamonds, five of clubs, seven of spades, six of diamonds, eight of diamonds, five of spades, nine of clubs, seven of diamonds, six of clubs, queen of diamonds, jack of diamonds, king of hearts, and four of spades. Okay, yeah, that was a little fast, I guess. We can redo that and I'll go a little slower, but for now, I just want everyone to like type in chat how many of those you guys got now. Okay, yeah, 20 isn't bad. 20 is pretty good actually. Yeah, I think I went a little too fast on that one, so I'll do it again, but I'll go a little slower this time and see if you guys can get everyone this time. Okay.
Oh, and a tip before going in, use a pen because it just flows quicker.
Yeah, that is true. Whenever people flow, they usually use two different colors of pens, one for the affirmation and one for the negation. But yeah, you can use a pen. Like for the good portion of my middle school career, I used a pencil because I was too lazy to bring a pen. But I wouldn't recommend that. I think pens just work out a lot better. Okay, is everyone ready? Okay. 3 of hearts, 9 of spades, queen of hearts, 3 of diamonds, king of diamonds, 5 of hearts, 4 of hearts, ace of clubs, queen of clubs, 2 of clubs, king of spades, 8 of clubs, jack of clubs, king of clubs, 6 of hearts, 9 of hearts, jack of spades, ace of spades, 10 of diamonds, 3 of clubs, 6 of spades, 5 of diamonds, queen of spades, ace of hearts, 2 of diamonds, ace of diamonds, 7 of clubs, 2 of hearts, 10 of spades, 4 of diamonds, 10 of hearts, 8 of spades, 10 of clubs, jack of hearts, 3 of spades, 7 of hearts, 4 of clubs, 2 of spades, 8 of hearts, 9 of diamonds, 5 of clubs, 7 of spades, 6 of diamonds, 8 of diamonds, 5 of spades, 9 of spades, 7 of diamonds, 6 of clubs, queen of diamonds, jack of diamonds, king of hearts, and 4 of spades. All right, everyone, type again how many you guys got in chat again. Okay, not bad, not bad. Yeah. So yeah, this is one of like those drills that Harvey was mentioning before. I guess like you can just do some kinds of like flowing drills to get yourself situated with like getting used to flowing, getting used to like writing down a lot of words. Yeah, 25 to 28 is really, really good, especially if you guys don't have a lot of experience. And I think everyone improved from last time, which is all just really, really good. But yeah, so like drills like these kinds of card things. I know some people like flow lyrics to a song where they just try to write down every single song there if they can. I know one really good one that I did practice with was "We Didn't Start the Fire" by Billy Joel. Some people just search up practice rounds on YouTube and they just try to like flow those things down. But the important thing is just remember, like it takes a lot of practice in order to get down like flowing, especially like as you get faster and faster, flowing becomes harder and harder. And so, yeah, just remember you should practice a lot in order to kind of get flowing down correctly.
Okay. So we can have, okay, so first we have a survey like last thing. I think maybe you guys are, I don't know if there's different forms. But we will send just a link in it. Okay. Yeah, so we just give you time, and I guess since this is the last meeting, we'll go into not like a lecture type, but we'll just talk to you guys about how to, if you guys are interested in like going into debate, what really helped us. So so I've always started debate since a young age, so I was pretty accustomed to a lot of the things, but a thing that something that helped me a lot are just camps. So if you do want to get into debate, I recommend going to a lot of camps. Some can get pretty expensive, but even the cheap ones are pretty good. It's like if like you may have this kind of like thought that like, oh, I don't really like debate too much, I won't really like camp. But I assure you that I was never really that enthusiastic about debate. But it looks good for colleges, and it also is really good for your like personal skills in general. Like I know that before I was in debate, I was just like never talk during class, and it's pretty bad because a lot of the things you'll see how many missed opportunities you have because you're just too quiet, or you don't really go out for opportunities. It'll also really help you because there's a lot of awkwardness that comes from things in class, such as like presentations. And now I can basically just effortlessly give a presentation like I do now without any script. So something that also part of the camp is also is just like pretty fun. It's a lot of most camps have you live away from your home. So if you are really just annoyed with your parents, like I was at the time, I would just love going to camp because I could just hang out with my friends and there's not a lot of like responsibilities. There was definitely like, it's definitely pretty laid back. You're on a college campus. and you basically just have your own classes. So it's like you have your own personal freedom to do whatever you want. It's kind of like an examination of like what you're going to do during college. You have like restaurants. It's basically like the college experience without having to worry about any of the college like type of like responsibilities, which I found was really fun. And I think that's like the best part of uh, debate is one, it's the camps, and second, it's the tournaments that you can go to. Tournaments are pretty much the same, especially bigger tournaments where you have travel tournaments. So if you're part of like a pretty like decent sized debate program, you'll be able to travel to places. I know me and Aiden have traveled to UT for was it state? No, it wasn't even state. It was just like it was just a tournament, like UT tournament. We traveled to UT, and once you're finished with the like with your rounds, you can basically just tour the campus if you want. You can just have fun. There's not a lot of responsibilities unless you have like a really strict debate teacher, which Aiden does have, unfortunately. But for me personally, I didn't really have that strict of a debate teacher. So he basically just allowed us to do whatever we want. So we went to like the pool there after our rounds, and we basically just hung out until it was very late. And a lot of these things, like there's obviously people who do take debate very seriously. But for me and maybe Aiden, I don't know. I think yes, Aiden. We usually have like just kind of laid back mentality. Like we go to tournaments, we do prep, but it's not that much. It does, but we do still have fun. And I think a big concern of me when I was receiving a lot of debate lectures is like, what do we do if we're basically just like we don't really have fun in it? And I think I asked a lot of people that question, and the usual response is that there are some components that have fun. Like if you have fun with your friends, you can definitely just join debate and just do just like baseline prep, but also just have fun at tournaments. And it's very fun to basically just hang out with your friends. Okay, and Aiden would like to flex a bit.
Really quickly. Okay. So just adding on a couple of things. One, so yeah, it is true that debate helps you with a lot of like public speaking stuff. But another thing that's like really overlooked is how much debate helps with like ELA. I know like during a lot of essays, I just like take previous like debate topics and just write about them because it's like debate is like a lot of research. You're investing a lot of time into studying the topic. And so it just becomes really easy to like write a research paper on it or like include some pieces of evidence into like a typical essay about it. I know I've used like in almost every single essay I've written this year, I've included some aspect of debate in it. And like you can even write about your debate experience, like your growth as a debater, or even things that you've learned over the courses of years, right? On travel tournaments, yeah, so like Harvey mentioned, I do have a little bit of a stricter teacher, but like still, like we still all have fun doing like debate tournaments. We still all have fun like going traveling to different places. I know Harvey and I have both traveled like for I think like back in middle school, for middle school nationals, we traveled to like Kentucky, we traveled to like Florida, Dallas, all these different places, right? And in like I think about like 2 weeks or something like that, I'll be taking a bus with like the rest of my school to attend NSDA nationals with the rest of the people who qualified for nationals from my school in Kentucky. And so like basically, yeah, it's a lot of traveling, but it is really fun. You get to make a lot of new friends. You get to like have a lot of experiences that you wouldn't usually have. And most of all, you get to get away from your parents, which is really great because you don't really have anyone to like regulate you. It's just, I guess like it gives you a little bit of like a taste of freedom, and yeah, you just get to have fun while doing it. Yeah, so for debate, it doesn't really matter like when you guys start. I know you guys are already in middle school and some of you guys are in like your 8th grade year, but I know there's a lot of people who have like done really well starting off in high school. Like if there are a lot of like very strong, I guess, strong debate teams in like within the region, right? Like Harvey goes to like one of the best schools for LD and I guess PF as well, honestly. They have a lot of success, like Zion, Jarvis, like all these people, like really big name people. They've found like in tremendous amounts of success on the national circuit. And like our school also has a lot of like really strong people in LD as well. Like people like Tommy Yu. I don't know if you guys have heard of these people, but yeah. And so like there's always an opportunity to get into debate no matter how old you are at this point. And so I strongly recommend everyone who does have like time on their hands, like if you're invested in another activity, it might not be a good idea for you to join debate. Debate does require a lot of time, but otherwise I do think that debate is a really good skill to pick up. And if you want to choose any activity, I strongly recommend debate being that one activity for you.
Yeah, and I think something that's really underrated in the debate is like the community. I know, like I personally, and also like the travel, like okay, so I'm going to tangent a bit, but like a brief tangent on that. A lot of I would recommend, like especially now, there's we said UT in Kentucky, and he referenced that was in middle school, but even in high school, you can also feel free to ask any questions. Yeah, so and Aiden can probably answer the one that's in chat already. So yeah, so this year, a lot of them have been canceled because of COVID, but next year definitely will open up. There are big travel tournaments like Harvard, and there's like things in like California that you can go to, and NYU as well. So there's a big travel tournaments. If you're really good, if you really spend time on it, you'll definitely have fun. So like I guess that's motivation for a lot of people to just like go to tournaments, and even in the tournaments, like you don't really have to do good. So but usually like you can there's a bunch of big travel tournaments, and going back to like the debate community in general, it's really nice like because you are spending like an hour just talking, like basically just like arguing with this other person, and it isn't as antagonistic as you think. Like you think like, oh yeah, we're arguing people, like, but it isn't. It's like everyone notices it's just like fun, and everyone's having a good time. So a lot of it does come from like I guess like it is a lot of fun just meeting up a lot of people. I know a lot of my friends have just like friends from across the country that they talk to because of the debate, and this is especially improved during like online debate. But a lot of people just know this person so well that when they see their name, they're like, oh, I know what they're going to run here. Like, I know what they're going to run. I know what their debate style is because of the amount of times you debated them. So it's very fun. The aspect of freedom is also just a lot of prevalent in debate. If you do debate, you can, again, like I know Aiden said it in his ALA, I've also said it a lot. And basically, you are known a lot for it. Like it's really helpful in your daily life, and it'll really benefit you. Aiden, I don't know if you've answered this question. But yes, you can concede defense in order to get rid of some offense. But you have to make sure that one, this is probably most effective when they have conceded that, well, they have fully went in on this defense. So if they have defense and offense, you can see defense, they can't really take it back because they said it. But make sure that they can't just like weigh it like, oh, this offense matters most. But yeah, you can basically just like answer. I think Aiden, yeah. Aiden also said something about it. Okay. Are there any questions? We can give you a bit. We have 2 minutes. If Aiden, there's anything else you wanna talk about.
I mean, okay. I guess I can go really quickly over, I guess, like awards. So yeah, so right now in middle school debate, there's not a lot of like, I guess, accomplishments you can get in debate. Like, okay, so you can win a tournament, obviously, and placing at a tournament is really well. But when you get into the high school level, once you start doing better at tournaments, it starts to mean a little more. So for example, placing at tournaments, like your local tournaments, gets you something called state points. And so these are what qualifies you to go to the state tournament. I think for LB and PF, it's the same. It's like 12 state points. This year it was 10 due to COVID and a lot of tournaments being canceled or being online. But yeah, like placing at tournaments at the high school level gives you state points, which just qualifies you for the state level like tournament, which doesn't exist in middle school. Another thing is there are things called bids, and this happens as you get to like the national circuit level tournaments. There's no real qualification for these kinds of tournaments, but these tournaments, like placing and doing well at them, allow you to qualify for other tournaments like the TOC, like the NSDA, stuff like that, right? So for example, like if you get like first place at what's called a bid tournament on the national circuit, you'll receive like a gold bid or something like that, right? Which once you get 2 of those, enables you to attend the gold TOC for PF, or enables you to attend the TOC for LD debate. And that's TOC stands for Tournament of Champions. That's like one of the hardest tournaments to get into because it's only like the top like X amount of debaters in the nation, and so it's one of like the few like complete national qualified tournaments you need to get into. Another one is NSDA, which I myself will be attending with like some of the members at Dulles in just a couple weeks. And that one, the way that works is they have a specific tournament for that. It's called the districts tournament or the district qualifier tournament. Basically, it'll just be each district has its own separate East district. Like for us, it's East Texas. They'll have their own separate district tournament, and placing top 3 there allows you to receive an invitation to attend the National Speech and Debate Association tournament. And so like it just becomes more and more important for you to like do better in rounds as you go higher up in the ladder. And so like you'll just get like more awards, more prestige, and these kinds of things look really, really nice for you on your college application. Being able to say that you were one of like the few hundred people who attended a national level tournament in debate is like really, really important, and it can like help further your status in debate. But yeah, I think we're basically out of time. So yeah, I'll let everyone get ready for their next class, and that'll be all for me. Yeah.